What if I told you Queensland, the state known for sunshine, beaches, and a relaxed tropical lifestyle, also hides small towns where that paradise image collapses instantly? Far from the coast, there are places where empty streets, abandoned buildings, and extreme isolation create an atmosphere locals openly describe as unsettling. Yeah, creepy towns. These towns carry tragic histories, unexplained events reported by multiple witnesses, and a psychological weight visitors say they feel the moment they arrive. This isn't ghost story marketing or tourist folklore. I'm Mr. Austral, and these are 10 Queensland towns where decay and real history combine to create places that many people find genuinely disturbing. Queensland's creepiest small towns. Let's start. Number 10. Maytown, far north Queensland. Gold rush, ghost town isolation. Maytown, in far north Queensland, about 200 kilometres west of Cooktown. With current population of 0, represents first entry where combination of complete abandonment following gold rush decline, extreme remoteness requiring four-wheel drive access through challenging tracks, tropical vegetation reclaiming buildings, creating that post-apocalyptic aesthetic where nature slowly consumes human civilization, and historical violence from frontier goldfields era, including Chinese minor conflicts. And that brutal gold rush justice creates atmosphere where even in broad daylight, the silence feels oppressive, and the ruins feel watched rather than simply empty. The history explains creepy atmosphere, with Maytown booming in 1870s as major goldfield centre, with population reaching several thousand, creating substantial town, with hotels, shops, Chinese quarter, and infrastructure supporting mining operations. But when gold depleted, the exodus was rapid, with population disappearing within years, leaving buildings to tropical climate and vegetation. The abandonment was so complete that Maytown transitioned from functioning town to complete ghost town within single generation, creating that eerie quality where you're walking through place that was vibrant living community and became ruined so quickly that personal possessions, furniture, and infrastructure remained scattered, creating frozen moment where life simply stopped. The remoteness intensifies creepiness, with Maytown being accessible only via challenging four-wheel drive tracks through Cape York, requiring significant commitment to visit, meaning casual tourists don't stumble across it accidentally. And the isolation means you're genuinely alone when exploring ruins, with nearest assistance being hours away, creating vulnerability that urban exploration never involves. The tropical vegetation reclaiming buildings creates visual creepiness where tree roots burst through walls, vines cover structures, and that relentless green slowly consumes everything, creating sense that nature is actively erasing human presence and you're witnessing civilization's impermanence. The reported phenomena include visitors describing feeling watched while exploring ruins, despite being alone, verified by multiple witnesses who independently report same sensation. Unexplained sounds, including footsteps on timber verandas and voices speaking in languages visitors don't recognize, creating auditory experiences that skeptics struggle explaining through normal causes. And that pervasive sense of sadness or heaviness that multiple visitors report feeling, particularly around cemetery, where numerous graves, including many young deaths, create physical reminder of harsh conditions and high mortality that characterized Goldfield's life. The cemetery is particularly unsettling, with graves from 1870s and 80s, including many children and young adults whose short lives ended from disease, accidents, or violence that Goldfields attracted. And the deteriorated condition of headstones being consumed by vegetation while still readable creates that memento mori, reminder that these were real people whose dreams of gold rush wealth ended in early graves far from families and home countries. The Chinese section of cemetery with distinctive grave markers and orientation creates additional layer where cultural displacement and racism that Chinese miners experienced during gold rush adds historical tragedy to physical creepiness. The buildings include hotel ruins with collapsed upper floors, shop remnants with rusted equipment scattered around, and residential structures where personal items occasionally surface, creating that eerie connection to people who lived here century and half ago. The timber construction, weathered by tropical climate, creates sounds when wind blows through, creating groans and creaks that your brain interprets as human presence, even when rationally knowing it's just old buildings settling and wind effects. The locals from Cooktown and surrounding areas treat Maytown with respect rather than casual tourism destination. And while they don't necessarily believe supernatural explanations, they acknowledge that atmosphere is genuinely unsettling and warn visitors to be prepared for isolation, difficult access, and that psychological weight that abandoned places create, particularly when historical research reveals how many people died young in harsh conditions pursuing gold wealth that most never achieved. The creepiness isn't manufactured tourism marketing, but rather genuine response to combination of isolation, decay, historical tragedy, and that silence broken only by natural sounds, creating environment where your mind feels emptiness with unease. Number 9. Ravenswood, North Queensland. Gold Town, dark atmosphere. Ravenswood in North Queensland, about 130 kilometres southwest of Townsville, with current population around 100, represents gold rush town that didn't completely die like Maytown, but declined to fraction of historical peak, creating that liminal state between ghost town and functioning settlement, where occupied buildings sit beside ruins, where tiny population creates eerie quietness during weekdays when you might walk Main Street without encountering another person, and where dark history, including numerous deaths from mining accidents, frontier violence, and that harsh justice, creates heaviness that residents acknowledge and visitors report feeling. The population decline from peak of several thousand during gold boom to current 100 creates surreal streetscape, where grand 19th century buildings designed for thriving town now serve minimal population, creating disproportion that feels wrong. And the mix of occupied and abandoned structures creates unpredictability, where you can't tell from distance whether building is home to someone or has been empty for decades, creating that unsettling quality of not knowing if you're being observed or are genuinely alone. The history includes typical gold rush violence and tragedy, but also specific incidents that residents mention when explaining why Ravenswood feels different from other historic towns, including mining accidents that killed multiple workers in single incidents, creating mass grief, frontier justice hangings where accused criminals were executed sometimes based on questionable evidence, creating lingering questions about whether innocent people died, and personal tragedies including family murder-suicide and domestic violence that small isolated communities experienced without support services or intervention that modern society provides. The reported phenomena include multiple residents and visitors describing shadow figures seen in peripheral vision, particularly around Imperial Hotel and railway station areas, where figures appear briefly, then vanish when looked at directly, creating consistent pattern that multiple witnesses report independently. Unexplained footsteps and voices in empty buildings verified by people who've lived in Ravenswood for decades and grown accustomed to sounds, but still can't explain through normal building settling or animal activity. And that feeling of being watched that visitors report, particularly when walking streets alone during quiet periods where rational explanation of actual residents observing newcomers doesn't fully account for intensity of sensation. The Imperial Hotel, built in 1870s, is focus for reported activity, with guests describing footsteps in hallways when verified that no other guests are present, door handles turning and doors opening when locked from inside, creating physical phenomena beyond just sounds or feelings, and specific room where multiple guests independently report feeling unwelcome or experiencing disturbed sleep with nightmares that cease when changing rooms. The hotel owners acknowledge reports while remaining neutral about supernatural explanations, noting that building is old with quirks, but that consistency of guest experiences in specific areas is difficult to dismiss entirely. The cemetery reflects harsh goldfields life, with numerous graves from 1870s through early 1900s, including many young deaths from mining accidents, disease, childbirth complications, and violence, creating visual reminder of mortality rates that modern Australians find shocking. The weathered headstones with partially legible inscriptions create that haunting quality where you're reading final words about real people whose lives ended tragically. And the isolated location on edge of town with sparse visitation means cemetery feels abandoned and neglected, adding to unsettling atmosphere. The mine sites surrounding Ravenswood include abandoned shafts, collapsed structures, and rusting equipment, creating dangerous landscape where unstable ground and hidden voids present genuine physical danger beyond any atmospheric creepiness. And locals warn against exploring mine areas, both for safety reasons and because several areas have reputations for being particularly unsettling, with visitors reporting feeling unwelcome or experiencing inexplicable anxiety that increases until leaving area. The atmosphere varies, with weekends bringing visitors for heritage tourism, creating busier feel that dilutes creepiness. But weekday visits, particularly during off-season, can mean encountering almost nobody, creating that genuine small-town isolation where silence is broken only by wind, birds, and occasional vehicle, creating environment where your mind becomes hyper-aware of every sound and movement. The locals are welcoming, but acknowledge that Ravenswood has heavy atmosphere that some people feel more strongly than others. And while they don't necessarily promote supernatural tourism, they don't dismiss visitors' experiences, either accepting that historical tragedy and isolation create genuine psychological effects. Number 8. Stanthorpe Region, Granite Belt, Isolated Farmhouse Phenomena. The Stanthorpe Region Granite Belt in southern Queensland, near New South Wales, border with scattered population across isolated properties rather than concentrated town, represents different creepiness, where extreme isolation of farmhouses separated by kilometres across harsh granite country. Brutal winter conditions, unusual for Queensland, creating deaths from exposure that tropical state residents don't expect. And consistent reports from multiple property owners describing unexplained phenomena on their land creates pattern, suggesting something about this specific region rather than individual properties. The geography creates isolation, where properties sprawl across granite boulder landscape with difficult terrain, poor soil, and that harsh beauty that's simultaneously attractive and forbidding. And the dispersed settlement pattern means neighbouring properties are kilometres apart, creating genuine isolation where you're alone in landscape that feels ancient and indifferent to human presence. The granite formations create strange acoustic effects, where sounds carry unexpectedly or are absorbed completely, creating auditory environment that your brain finds unsettling because normal sound patterns don't apply. The climate is unusual for Queensland, with winter temperatures dropping below freezing, regularly creating snowfall and ice that tropical state doesn't typically experience. And the cold creates deaths from exposure, particularly historically when travellers became lost or vehicles broke down in conditions that they didn't anticipate in Queensland context. The historical deaths from cold, combined with isolation, create that psychological knowledge that environment killed people through something as un-Queenslandish as freezing, creating cognitive dissonance that adds to unsettling feeling. Subscribe to show that these videos actually help and make sense. The reported phenomena are consistent across multiple properties, with owners who don't know each other describing similar experiences, including stock animals refusing to enter specific paddocks despite adequate feed, and water, creating behaviour that farmers with decades of experience can't explain through normal animal psychology. Unexplained lights seen at night across empty paddocks that move in patterns inconsistent with vehicles, wildlife, or atmospheric phenomena verified by multiple witnesses simultaneously. And that feeling of being watched when alone on property, particularly in certain gullies or around specific granite formations that multiple people independently identify as feeling wrong. The historical context includes Indigenous cultural significance, with Granite Belt being traditional land with sacred sites and ceremonial grounds. And while specific locations aren't publicly disclosed out of respect for Indigenous cultural protocols, the general awareness that you're living on land with deep spiritual significance to traditional owners creates psychological layer where respect for that history intersects with personal experiences that can't be easily explained. The overlap between areas that Indigenous knowledge identifies as significant and areas where contemporary residents report unsettling experiences creates pattern that some interpret as validation of Indigenous spiritual understanding, while skeptics note could be coincidence or psychological suggestion. 1. The isolation creates practical creepiness, where if you experience something unexplained, you're alone without immediate support or witnesses to validate your experience, and the knowledge that emergency services are significant distance away creates vulnerability that compounds any unsettling experiences. The winter darkness with long nights and early sunsets creates extended periods where you're alone in dark landscape with only artificial light, creating environment that humans psychologically find threatening, triggering evolutionary responses to darkness and isolation that urban living suppresses. The locals approach the topic carefully, acknowledging experiences while remaining practical about living and working the land. And while some dismiss unexplained phenomena as just quirks of isolated living, others quietly admit to experiences they can't explain, and strategies they've developed for managing unease, including avoiding certain areas, particularly after dark, maintaining routines that create psychological comfort, and accepting that some things can't be explained but can be managed through respect and awareness. Number 7. Betoota, far southwest, Queensland. Pub and nothing else. Betoota, in far southwest Queensland, about 160 kilometres north of Birdsville, with population fluctuating between 0 and 5, depending on whether pub is operating, represents creepiness of extreme isolation, where settlement consists essentially of pub and few outbuildings surrounded by hundreds of kilometres of empty gibber plain, creating that existential creepiness of human presence in landscape, so hostile and empty that your presence feels absurd. And the silence when pub is closed creates total isolation, where you're genuinely alone in environment that could kill you within days if vehicle failed or water ran out. The name recognition comes from satirical news outlet Betoota Advocate, creating ironic fame for place that most Australians will never visit. But the actual Betoota is profoundly isolated and genuinely unsettling in ways that satire doesn't capture. The pub, when operating, provides brief social contact and services for travellers and surrounding station workers. But when pub closes, which happens periodically, when operators depart due to isolation or economic factors, the entire settlement becomes abandoned, creating ghost town that could repopulate or die completely depending on whether anyone chooses to reopen pub. The creepiness comes from that uncertain state between existence and abandonment, where Betoota might be inhabited or might be empty depending on when you visit. And the architectural remnants of more substantial past, when Betoota had larger population serving Cobb & Co coaching route, create that disproportion between infrastructure and current population. The isolation is profound, with nearest substantial settlement being Birdsville, 160 kilometres away, and Windora, 170 kilometres, creating position where you're genuinely at edge of viable human habitation. The landscape intensifies creepiness, with gibber plains extending to horizon, creating visual monotony, where nothing breaks flatness except occasional rock outcrop, and the gibber stones covering ground create sound when walked on that carries unexpectedly far in silence, creating acoustic environment where you hear your own presence amplified. The emptiness creates that existential unease, where absence of features makes navigation difficult and distances deceptive, creating awareness that getting lost or stranded would be fatal in environment with no water, no shade, and temperatures that kill through heat exposure. The reported phenomena are fewer than more populated entries because visitor numbers are tiny, but the consistent reports from travellers include that feeling of being watched, despite verified isolation, unexplained sounds at night that don't match wind or animal activity, and psychological effects of silence so complete that some people report auditory hallucinations or intrusive thoughts that they attribute to sensory deprivation from lack of normal environmental stimuli. The isolation creates conditions where your mind lacks external stimuli to process, creating internal generation of sensory experience that can feel external and threatening. The historical context includes deaths from exposure, dehydration, and vehicle accidents in surrounding area, creating knowledge that landscape kills people regularly, and the gibber plains contain scattered graves and memorial cairns marking locations where travelers died, creating physical reminders that you're in dangerous environment. The memorials are simple rock cairns or crosses that weather slowly disappears, and stumbling across them while exploring creates that visceral reminder of mortality in landscape that appears empty but contains evidence of deaths. The pub itself, when operating, is welcoming refuge, providing cold drinks, meals, and conversation that breaks isolation, creating that sharp contrast between social warmth inside and hostile emptiness outside that intensifies awareness of environment. When pub is closed, the locked building surrounded by emptiness creates post-apocalyptic aesthetic where human infrastructure sits unused in landscape that doesn't care whether humans are present or not. Number 6. Irvinebank, Atherton. Tablelands, mining town decline. Irvinebank in Queensland's Atherton Tablelands, about 140 kilometres southwest of Cairns, with current population around 250, represents mining town decline, where tin and other metal mining created boom, followed by bust leaving population fraction of historical peak, and the combination of deteriorating mining infrastructure creating dangerous landscape, dense rainforest surroundings, creating dark oppressive atmosphere, particularly during wet season, numerous mining deaths creating tragic history, and consistent reports of unexplained phenomena from residents and visitors creates genuinely unsettling place despite being relatively accessible compared to more remote entries. The population decline from peak of several thousand during mining boom to current 250 creates that familiar disproportion where infrastructure designed for much larger town serves minimal population. But Irvinebank's creepiness comes more from environmental setting and specific historical incidents than just general decline. The rainforest surrounding town creates dark enclosed feeling unlike open country ghost towns, and the dense vegetation means visibility is limited, creating that primal unease of not seeing potential threats approaching. The mining history includes numerous deaths from accidents, including mine collapses, and equipment failures and explosions, killing multiple workers in single incidents, creating concentrated grief, and the dangerous conditions that characterized early mining means many deaths occurred in preventable circumstances, creating that tragic sense of unnecessary loss. The mine sites surrounding Irvinebank include unstable shafts, contaminated water, and collapsing structures, creating genuine physical danger beyond atmospheric creepiness. The reported phenomena include multiple residents describing seeing figures in old mining areas, particularly around certain collapsed shafts where fatal accidents occurred, with witnesses describing figures in period mining clothing appearing briefly before vanishing, creating consistent pattern. Unexplained sounds, including equipment operating when all machinery is verified, shut down, and unmanned, creating auditory phenomena that multiple witnesses report. And specific locations, including certain mine sites and sections of Old Town, where people consistently report feeling unwelcome or experiencing sudden onset anxiety that dissipates when leaving area. The Museum and Historical Society document town history, including mining disasters, preserving photographs of victims and accounts of accidents, creating archive of tragedy that's accessible to visitors wanting to understand context. The photographs of miners who died young create that haunting connection to real people whose lives ended in preventable accidents pursuing dangerous work for wages that barely sustained families. The environmental setting creates additional creepiness, with wet season bringing torrential rain that floods areas and creates that oppressive humidity and darkness, where cloud cover blocks sun for days, creating gloom. And the leeches and other rainforest creatures that are harmless but viscerally unpleasant create environment where physical discomfort compounds psychological unease. The dense rainforest means that even short distances from town feel isolated with limited visibility and difficult terrain, creating awareness that getting lost or injured would be a serious situation despite relative proximity to civilization. The locals acknowledge town's dark history while maintaining community pride in heritage and resilience. And while not everyone believes supernatural explanations for reported phenomena, there's general acceptance that Irvinebank has heavy atmosphere that certain people find more oppressive than others. The mining heritage tourism brings visitors interested in history, but the creepy reputation also attracts paranormal enthusiasts, creating tension where some residents embrace supernatural angle as economic opportunity, while others wish focus remained on historical significance rather than ghost stories. Number 5. Boulia, Central West Queensland, Min Lights. Phenomenon Boulia in Central West Queensland, about 300 kilometres north of Windora, with population around 300, represents entry where creepiness comes less from tragic history or decay than from specific unexplained phenomenon that's been reported consistently for over a century, creating scientific interest, tourist attraction, and genuine mystery that skeptics haven't definitively explained despite various attempts. The Min lights are unexplained lights seen in area around Boulia that appear as glowing orbs that move across landscape, follow vehicles, respond to observers, and display behavior that doesn't match any conventional explanation, including swamp gas, reflections, atmospheric phenomena, or hoaxes. The phenomenon is documented through hundreds of witness accounts dating back to early 1900s, including credible observers such as police, scientists, and longtime residents whose descriptions remain consistent across decades, creating pattern that's difficult to dismiss as misidentification or fabrication. The witnesses describe lights as ranging from basketball to car-sized glowing spheres that appear typically at night on empty roads or across flat country, that move in ways inconsistent with vehicles or aircraft, including hovering, rapid acceleration, and following observers who attempt fleeing, creating behavior suggesting intelligence or at least responsiveness. The attempts at scientific explanation have included various theories such as bioluminescence from fungi or insects creating natural light sources, ball lightning or other atmospheric electrical phenomena creating brief glowing plasma, reflections from distant vehicle lights, or buildings being bent through atmospheric layers creating mirage effects, or piezoelectric effects from ground stress releasing energy as light. But none of these explanations fully account for all reported behaviors, particularly the apparent responsiveness where lights react to observers' actions, suggesting either intelligence or complex natural feedback system that science hasn't identified. The tourism angle is significant, with Boulia embracing Min lights as attraction, including museum exhibit explaining phenomenon and history of sightings. Annual Min encounter event bringing visitors hoping to experience lights, and generally marketing creepy unexplained phenomenon as drawcard while maintaining respectful approach that acknowledges genuine mystery rather than trivializing through excessive commercialization. The challenge is balancing economic benefit from tourism against maintaining credibility and respecting that for many witnesses, the experience was genuinely frightening rather than entertainment. The witness accounts include descriptions of terror when lights followed vehicles, with drivers unable to outrun them despite high speeds. Descriptions of lights approaching within meters of observers who report feeling watched or studied, creating psychological impact beyond just visual phenomenon. And accounts of lights appearing to play or interact with observers, flashing or changing intensity in apparent response to actions like flashing headlights or shouting, creating that unsettling sense of intelligence behind phenomenon. The cultural context includes Indigenous traditional owners having historical awareness of lights, with Betoota people having stories about spirit lights predating European settlement, suggesting phenomenon isn't modern hoax, but rather genuine environmental occurrence that Indigenous knowledge incorporated into spiritual understanding. The overlap between contemporary scientific interest and traditional Indigenous spiritual explanation creates interesting intersection where both frameworks acknowledge genuine phenomenon while interpreting through different lenses. The skepticism is appropriate given extraordinary claims requiring extraordinary evidence, but the consistency of reports across century plus, the credibility of many witnesses, the failed attempts at definitive conventional explanation, and the lack of obvious hoax motive or mechanism creates situation where dismissing phenomenon entirely requires assuming vast conspiracy or mass hallucination that seems less plausible than accepting that something genuinely unusual occurs in Boulia area, even if scientific explanation hasn't been identified. The creepiness comes from that uncertainty where you're in location where unexplained phenomenon regularly occurs, and rational mind struggles between scientific skepticism and acknowledgement that witnesses you trust describe experiences that conventional physics doesn't easily explain. Thought number 4. Walhalla, Victoria Border Region, Ghost Town Heaviness. While Walhalla is technically Victoria, not Queensland, the border region around Kelani and surrounding Queensland Granite Belt shares similar atmosphere of isolated gold rush history, and the specific Queensland location of Kelani, with population around 900, about 130 kilometres southwest of Warwick, represents that same creepy combination of historical tragedy from gold and timber industry deaths, isolated location in rugged terrain, dense vegetation creating oppressive atmosphere, and reported phenomena from multiple residents creating genuinely unsettling environment. The Kelani area history includes timber industry deaths from falling trees, equipment accidents, and that dangerous work in isolated locations where medical help was hours away, creating preventable deaths from treatable injuries, plus gold rush activity creating similar boom-bust patterns to other entries with associated violence and tragedy. The Main Range National Park surrounding Kelani includes dense rainforest, steep terrain, and conditions where people have become lost or died from exposure, creating ongoing danger alongside historical tragedy. The reported phenomena include hikers and residents describing feeling watched in certain forest areas, particularly around old timber camps where fatal accidents occurred. Unexplained sounds, including timber falling and equipment operating when verified that no logging is occurring, creating auditory experiences that multiple witnesses report. And specific trails or locations where people consistently report anxiety or feeling unwelcome that they attribute to something beyond normal wariness of isolated wilderness. The environmental setting creates natural creepiness with dense vegetation, limiting visibility, steep terrain, creating exhaustion and disorientation, and weather that changes rapidly, creating dangerous conditions, particularly for unprepared visitors. The rainforest environment means sounds carry strangely with echoes and dampening effects, creating acoustic confusion where determining direction and distance of sounds becomes difficult. Number 3. Monto, North Burnett, Isolation and Silence. Monto in Queensland's North Burnett region, about 450 kilometres northwest of Brisbane, with population around 1,200, represents creepiness of functional small town that nonetheless has unsettling atmosphere that visitors and some residents acknowledge, where combination of isolation from major centres, economic decline from forestry industry contraction, dense surrounding bushland, and that profound silence during midweek when streets are empty creates environment that feels wrong in ways difficult to articulate but consistently reported. The population of 1,200 is sufficient that town isn't ghost town, but the demographic skew toward elderly and minimal young families creates that dying town atmosphere where you see closed businesses, to deteriorating buildings, and general sense of decline, creating psychological weight. The isolation means cultural events and social activities are minimal, creating that stagnation where same people encounter each other repeatedly without fresh arrivals or departures, creating static social landscape. The reported phenomena are subtler than entries with specific incidents or light phenomena, consisting more of that general unease that visitors report, particularly when staying overnight, where streets that are quiet during day become completely silent at night, creating that sensory deprivation where absence of normal urban background noise becomes oppressive, and where darkness is complete beyond streetlights, creating awareness that you're isolated from emergency services or support if situation arose. The surrounding bushland includes dense forest, where people have become lost, requiring search and rescue operations, where vehicle accidents on isolated roads have resulted in deaths because help arrived too late, and where that awareness of danger creates psychological backdrop to daily life that compounds any atmospheric creepiness, creating genuine unease based on rational assessment of isolation and risk. Number 2. Forsayth, Northwest Queensland, railway town. Abandonment Forsayth in northwest Queensland, about 400 kilometres west of Cairns, with population around 60, represents railway town that declined when transport patterns changed, leaving minimal population in isolated location, and the combination of near abandonment creating ghost town aesthetic, extreme isolation hours from emergency services, harsh climate creating months of oppressive heat, and specific historical incidents, including deaths and violence, creating tragic history, all combine to create genuinely creepy environment that even brief visits create psychological impact. The population of 60 creates ultimate small town dynamics where everyone knows everyone, but social options are essentially non-existent, and the disproportion between infrastructure designed for larger railway era population and current minimal residents creates that eerie ghost town quality, where occupied buildings are exceptions among abandoned structures. The railway heritage creates unique creepiness with old platforms, water towers, and railway infrastructure, slowly deteriorating, creating industrial ruins. Aesthetic. The isolation is profound, with Forsayth being hours from Cairns, across roads that are challenging and remote, creating genuine concern about vehicle reliability because breakdown would create dangerous situation. The climate is harsh inland Queensland, with extreme summer heat, creating months where outdoor activity is dangerous and oppressive heat affects mood and judgment, creating psychological strain. The reported phenomena include visitors describing that watched feeling, despite verified isolation, unexplained sounds, particularly around old railway infrastructure, where footsteps and voices are heard when area is empty, and specific buildings, including old railway barracks, where multiple people independently report feeling unwelcome or experiencing disturbed sleep, attributing to something beyond just unfamiliar environment. Number 1. Aramac, Central Queensland, outback town, strange atmosphere. At number 1, Aramac in Central Queensland, about 1,100 kilometres northwest of Brisbane, with population around 300, represents outback town that has creepiest combination of isolation, creating hours from any assistance, historical tragedy, including deaths from disease outbreaks, and violence, creating heavy past, architectural decay with grand buildings, from pastoral boom, now deteriorating, creating visual creepiness, and most significantly, the consistent reports from visitors about oppressive atmosphere that's difficult to explain rationally, but which multiple people independently describe, creating patterns suggesting something about Aramac specifically, rather than just general outback isolation. The population of 300 maintains basic town services, but the demographic decline and aging population creates dying town atmosphere, and the grand buildings from pastoral boom era when Aramac was regional centre now serve minimal population, creating disproportion that feels wrong. The isolation places Aramac hours from Longreach or Barcaldine, creating genuine remoteness, where emergency response would be delayed and where that awareness of isolation creates psychological vulnerability. The historical context includes disease outbreaks killing numerous residents, particularly children, creating concentrated grief. Violence from frontier era, including shootings and that rough justice. An economic decline, creating departures and that abandonment feeling where people who could leave did leave, suggesting those remaining either have no alternatives or reasons for staying that outsiders don't understand, creating suspicion. The reported phenomena are most consistent and widespread of any entry with visitors describing overwhelming sense of being unwelcome that begins upon entering town and intensifies with time spent there, describing specific locations, including certain streets and buildings, where anxiety becomes so intense that visitors choose leaving rather than continuing, and describing that physical sensation of being watched that persists despite verified isolation, creating psychological impact that many visitors describe as most unsettling experience they've had in Australian small town. Support the channel by subscribing, because content documenting Queensland's creepiest small towns beats dismissing atmospheric creepiness as imagination, while acknowledging that isolation, tragedy, and unexplained phenomena create genuinely unsettling places deserving respectful consideration. And there you have it, 10 Queensland small towns where combinations of isolation, historical tragedy, environmental harshness, and unexplained phenomena create genuinely creepy atmospheres that visitors report experiencing, proving that Queensland's Sunshine State reputation masks darker undercurrents in remote locations, where human presence feels precarious, and where that psychological weight from past tragedies and present isolation creates environments that even skeptics acknowledge feeling unsettled visiting.